Time for us to get started, at least about 30 seconds. So we have a treat this morning. Brother Josh Blackmer and his family are with us. They're from West Palm Beach, so it's good to have him. He works in the United States as a missionary. They go to a lot of places in the Southwest and they work with congregations that don't have a preacher, doesn't have an eldership or deacons. They try to get them on board and get started and get them established. And then for about a month out of each year, he goes to the islands or Haiti and teaches there. So it's something that we're all considering. So it sounds like a good thing. So you may have remembered him. He was here a while back. So if you do know him, Brother Josh Blackmer. If you don't know him, he's still Brother Josh Blackmer. So it's good to have you.
Yes, sir. It's good to be with you all this morning and talking about this work we're doing. We are beginning this work, and what we're doing is still kind of fledgling. I do want to talk about some things that we've done in the past to introduce kind of who we are. There's an elder of the congregation at Palm Beach Lakes that used to use this phrase, "You don't know me from Adam's house cat." So we don't know each other very well, but I want to introduce ourselves and the work that we've been doing and kind of show you kind of where we're going from here. And so looking at our lives, we were graduates from Freed-Hardeman in 2004, and when Karen and I met, our dream was to go into the mission field. Our desire was to go in the mission field. But in order to do that, I was coached by my grandfather. He said, you need to work with the congregation for a while and get them to know you. And so we were looking for a congregation that would send us into the mission field, that we could work alongside them for a period of few years, and then they would send us out, and they'd be sending one of their own out, not just sending somebody that they don't know very well into the mission field. And so we did that. We went and worked with Palm Beach Lakes and started with them in 2004, August of 2004. A lot happened between August and September of 2004, if you've been around here very long. They said they didn't have hurricanes, and then we had like 3 within the last, those first few months of the time being there with them. But it was good. We learned a lot and working with them. And then our prayer the whole time when we were looking at going into the mission field was, God, send us where we need to go. I believe in praying open-ended prayers and praying big. Sometimes we pray to God and say, God, and we ask for a super specific thing, but sometimes we need to say, God, use me. And that was our prayer, use us where we need to go. And there happened to be a work that Palm Beach Lakes was already involved in Asunción, Paraguay, and that team was coming back, and we're looking for another team to kind of go down and continue the work. And so we ended up going to Asunción, Paraguay, and learning the language there and working with the congregation in Asunción. And so I don't know if many of you know your South American geography, but Paraguay is kind of there in the middle, in the heart, one of 2 landlocked countries. It was Asunción as a city was called the mother of cities, as the Spaniards would come upriver there between Montevideo and Buenos Aires. They would travel upstream to Asunción in the 1500s and launch off from there into South America. So it has a rich history there. So we worked with them. This was the congregation, Avenida Sacramento, and we worked with them from 2009 to 2014 was our time there. And great group of people, and we still have lots of friends there, obviously. This is the congregation, the building that was purchased just shortly after we got there. Incidentally, next door, I don't know if you see the building kind of next door, they share walls there. You've heard of zero lot lines? This is like negative lot, like they're just literally walls against each other there. So right next door is a casino, and it's a very popular area. At one point, the casino was painted like a leopard, so we would say we were the lamb next to the lion in that area. But that was the building was used for the work. This is our team that we were with while we're there, and our children are small there in this picture, but they're both at Freed-Hardeman currently. Really quick. So while we were, these buttons are sensitive. Okay. All right, there it is. Okay. So while we were in Paraguay, we also started to work on Easter Island. This one of the kind of far-flung islands of the Pacific Triangle. And there's a missionary that we had been doing a lot of research with, a missionary that we've been talking a lot, and he'd been counseling us on mission work. He had been a missionary in the Pacific Islands for forever, and for at least at this point, I think 40 years. And Robert Martin is his name, and he was counseling us on what to do. But while we were doing it, he knew we were going to be learning Spanish. This is a Spanish-speaking island. He said, hey, would you consider putting money aside to go to Easter Island and work there? Because his desire was to put a congregation of the Lord's Church on every island. And so we did that. Starting in 2010, we started making 2 trips a year, going to Easter Island and working there. And we began a small congregation on the island. This is, just to give you an idea, the island here. You see in your bottom right-hand corner, there's that volcano, and there's a line right there where the town is. Hungaroa is the town. That line is a runway that cuts that section of the island kind of in half. That runway was built by NASA because the Discovery shuttles, back before we could just, come back the way things have changed with SpaceX. But with the Discovery shuttles, they would have to land, if they overshot Florida, overshot Houston, and there was a big problem, they would land on this island. And so they had this runway designed to do that, which incidentally allows them to land large planes. So there's about 60 to 70,000 tourists a year pre-COVID that were coming to the island and stop over and go on to Tahiti. So this is I forgot, I do it over here. An aerial photo to give you an idea. It's not a huge island, 18 miles north-south. The largest, I think, is 6 miles east-west in it. And that's accidentally fresh water in the bottom of that volcano caldera there. These are the statues they're famous for. They do have bodies. They're not just heads. The ones that you see buried famously are just from sediment and stuff that have been buried. But give you an idea of where it is. It is one of the most remote inhabited islands. It's not the most, but is one of the most remote inhabited islands on the planet. And it's like 12,000 inhabitants of the island there. When we went to begin the work, I would go and kind of just talk with people, because you got to do that, right? If you're going to evangelize, you have to talk with people. And I would ask them, do you know of people that just believe in just the Bible and worship just the Bible? And they said, oh yeah, there's this group over here, there's this group over there. They never told me about, there's Mormons on the island, they never sent me to them. But so we would go and talk with these individuals. And sometimes on Sunday I would just show up and be there with them. And usually on a Sunday, if you showed up and you're with them on a Sunday, they ask you to witness. Have you ever heard of that? Or they ask you, well, stand up, we're glad you're visiting. Would you witness for us? Which Paul did in the synagogue, didn't he? So I got to preach the gospel. They just let me preach. They had no idea what they were asking me to do. And generally, afterwards, the preacher came and found me. Their pastor would come and find me and try and teach me a better way. So we would have a matching of the wits is what would happen. But so we went around all over the island trying to find if there was the church already, right? Because I believe that, and the New Testament teaches that if you put the Bible in a community and there are honest hearts that read the scriptures, you will have the church. And so we were looking for those who might already be the church on that island, and we incidentally did not find them, but we continued working and teaching with individuals. One of the first converts on the island, here are some of the, I'll tell you the background to this picture. One of the first converts, her name was Piki Araki. Piki is an amazing lady. We just started going around asking people if they wanted to study the Bible. There's just no way of getting around it. You have to get down to that. And so we're passing out pamphlets, and we're just going around and talking to people and asking if they want to study the Bible. Kara went to Piki. She was selling her things to tourists there in her little shop. And Kara asked her, would you like to study the Bible? And she said, how can I say no when God has brought the Bible to my door? That's not a typical answer, right? You don't get that very often. You're kind of used, after you ask the question, you're already kind of getting ready to turn because it's going to be no, right? So you're already kind of getting ready for that. But there was that response, and so we went to her house that night and studied the Bible with her. And there were just tears rolling down her cheek because she had never had anybody just take the time to study the Bible with her and teach her methodically how to go through the Scriptures. We are blessed, brethren, by being able to take the Scriptures, look at them, and study through them and see how they lay out. We don't understand that there are people out there who are trying to worship or trying to find God that don't know that there's an actual story to the Bible. There's actually a message here. It's not just random passages torn out of context. God has a message for us. And so when they hear that message, in her case, she had never heard it before like that. And so she was, incidentally, her son there is waving, Uri. He was baptized before her. We were about the same age. He was baptized, and then she was baptized shortly after that. But when I was baptizing him, I was teaching him how to baptize others. That's just how you do it. And so I said, you are baptized. And then we said, well, here's how you baptize somebody. He's like, I can do this. I said, yes, you are a saint. You can do these things. You can baptize other people. And so it's hard for them to grasp that he actually, this is his wife in the corner there taking the selfie with us. She was baptized by Uri. Uri baptized her. She had been known what she needed to do. We've been studying with her for a long time. And then she was baptized, and they were married shortly later. And so it's so there are 4 souls on the island that we work with and study with. And we continue to do that via the internet on Sundays. And so we will get together, and I'll lead a Bible study, and then Uri will lead our thoughts in the Lord's Supper. And so we do that together on Sunday. So that's Easter Island and the work that's there. The future of that work, we're trying to get, these are brethren who are in Santiago that we're trying to get going over as well. We're trying to get things ramped back up since COVID. The island shut down pretty hardcore, so it took us a while before we can get in there. But these brethren, they are doing a lot of work in Santiago and all over Chile. They have what they call Culto Unido, where they all come together on the 5th Sunday of the month. All the congregations in the Santiago area come together. And all the funds donated on that Sunday go to mission work in Chile. And so we talked with them, and we're looking at having some of them go to Easter Island in the future. Cuba is another work that we're working with, and to just give you an idea of what's going on in Cuba. How many of you know about the church in Cuba? A little bit, maybe. Just put some information up here. It was started in the 1800s, just shy of the 1800s, as far as we know, and there were congregations established then. But it was, y'all familiar with the missionary societies back in the day? Missionary Society was kind of starting it, and they decided to move on to another country, and they kind of left those congregations in a lurch that they had started. So brethren in South Florida and other countries or congregations around the country started sending support and helping the work there. And after the missionaries returned in the 30s, and then something happened in Cuba. Right, there was this thing called the revolt, and before that there were 100 congregations with 5,000 members, as far as we could know, before all that changed. And then let's see if we can get this up on the screen for you there. Let me just go ahead and put all this up here. Well. So things changed with the fall of the Soviet Union. By the time they were able to go back in there, the congregations had kind of dwindled down with support. It was very difficult for them at that time, and things are coming back, and they're coming back with their own. There's a support still going in, but they're doing a lot in the work there. What they do in a certain area is they'll have a congregation maybe in a large city. And they are, in this case, we'll talk about Matanzas in a moment. They'll have a congregation in Matanzas, and they're all, they travel in every so often on a few Sundays to come together as one congregation. But traveling in is difficult. It's a challenge. They don't have cars necessarily, and public transportation, if it exists, is expensive. And so what happens is the preacher will go to them. So there'll be a congregation, but there'll be like satellite groups that meet together in certain communities, And so a preacher might preach 7 times on a Sunday, going around to these different groups and making sure that everybody is edified and built up. And so it's a different kind of work, but it's working for them. We've been working in the areas of Matanzas and then Cologne, there in those areas. Just to give you an idea of the roads, I think is the next picture coming up. Yes, so the roads there. This last time we were there, it was really dry. It hadn't rained in like 8 months, and it was more dry than a tinderbox. It was crazy, but it also created problems for the community. The church in Matanzas bought property, and with that property, they used the produce. In this case, it was tomato season. They used the produce to give those out to the members because food is really, really hard to get. It was like 1930s bread lines kind of situation when we were there. It was very, very difficult. And so any food they can get is a help. And so in this case, they were growing tomatoes and some other vegetables at the time. And they give those out to members, and they give those out to people in the community. The government is not as oppressive as some might say. And I'm not saying I'm not on the side of the government there, but the way they have things set up, if you play by the rules, if you do what they say, and they recognize that you're not trying to subvert them as a government, that you're just trying to be Christians in an area, they recognize that. And so they recognize that the church there in Matanzas was just trying to help people. And so the government actually gave them more land right next door to where they already had, so they can continue to cultivate more property, more land. And then the government opened up for them to go into the orphanages and go to the homes for the disabled and older people. And so that opened up the door for the church to go in. No other religious organization can go into those places. Just the Lord's church is going into those places because of what they've been doing, because they've seen what they're doing. I think we read a passage, they will know you are Christians by your love. And that was recognized by the church of Matanzas, and they're able to do that. So we went in, Gary Dull and myself went into this area. I'm there as a translator and working with Gary. Gary's there, he's studied a lot in agriculture, and so here we are with the guys that are working there, talking about soil acidity and talking about what areas they can grow and produce more, trying to get them to be able to produce more with the land that they have and work with them. They know a lot, but just giving them some more tools and different things so they can help grow more. They're actually right now, Gary and some other congregations are trying to put together funds to send a pump down there because of the drought. They actually have a creek, a spring-fed creek that goes behind them. They call it a river, but it's a creek. And pump water up for the plants and everything. But anyway, God's blessed them and able to do what they're doing, and we're helping them there in that. I can get the clicker to advance. We also preached there to the congregation in Matanzas, and I translated. So there we are preaching. Get this slide to go. And then we went to the next city in Cologne the next day, or that same day. Went to this other congregation and taught there. This congregation is a small country congregation, and they happened to gather together that day. But generally, it's just a few gather there in Cologne, and then you go out to the satellite and preach around, kind of similar fashion. Circuit riding preaching is kind of what you would call it, what we're used to. But a great brethren. Now, what you'll notice about this is that you have predominantly older members and then some younger children. What's happening in Cuba, obviously, is a lot of people are fleeing Cuba and are leaving, and you've heard about that. And so a lot of the middle-aged people are leaving. There's not as many there, and that's kind of being reflected in the congregation. And incidentally, it's harder to find men that will preach because they're leaving as well. And that's affecting the church. There were several baptisms while we were there. Again, just teaching the gospel. This man here is 84 years old. He was baptized, so it's never too late, right? Never too late. And so it was a joy to be with them. And then just encouraging the brethren. We're studying with them. Life is difficult there. We don't recognize how easy we have it. One, just to be able to worship. When they worship, they have to worship. It has to be a house church. It has to be a house that's owned by somebody in order to worship there. You can't have signage out. You can't have those kind of things out. But as long as you play by the rules, it's not going to be a problem. It's when you start trying to do things outside of the rules that they begin to notice things. Also, when we go to Cuba, we can't speak on, you can go two ways. You can go as a tourist visa. If you go as a tourist visa, you cannot publicly speak. You cannot do anything. You cannot teach people the Bible. You could only stay in places that are tourist, approved places and use tourist-approved transportation. You can't ride around with church members and those kind of things. But we go on a religious visa. The way things are set up in Cuba and the way the government has it organized is there's a president of the church there in Cuba, and that is by name only. And he communicates with the government. And so we communicate with him, and he gets us the religious visas so that we can come in and actually work. As long as we do it that way, it's fine. But if you try to go in on a religious visa and do this, and you get found out, it will be bad for you, and it will be bad for the church, for the congregation there. But the Lord's church is known for doing things, playing by the rules, so that helps us to do this. Here we are meeting in some members' homes and kind of outside of Cologne and traveling out to them. Again, they just want to hear the gospel. They want to know, they want to learn, they want to grow, and it's a blessing to be with them and teach them. Cuba's famous for their cars. Now, this is a Bel Air. I forget what year. I think it was Bel Air. But some of you may be correcting me. I don't remember. 57? Okay. Some of you guys know this. But guess what engine's in it? It's inline 4 Isuzu, diesel engine. And they said that for the cars there, that was Raul. He was our chauffeur while we were there. He actually has incidentally recently moved to Miami where his son is. But they'll have like inline 4 diesel engines in them. And they say that cars must run forever, amen. Right? And so it's they have these things running forever. They are extremely smart on and resourceful on how to keep these cars running. He has a shop in his garage that he made a lathe with a motorcycle engine and reducers. Anyway, it's just crazy. You guys geeking out on that, you guys don't care. But anyway, really, really neat guy. And circumstances kind of tells you about the ingenuity of the people in Cuba. They'll get things done. So the work in Cuba, I like comparing it kind of to this, and we see in Acts chapter 2, and we'll get into the Bible portion of our class this morning. You've read this before, right? Going house to house, and then people using their possessions, and that's what we see in Cuba. If somebody had resources, they would use it for the brethren that are there that needed it. If somebody had medicine and there was a need, that's one thing we bring in a lot of medicines and stuff, and you see that happening in Cuba, and the worshiping from house to house, and those that are being saved. So I like kind of comparing that work. So that explains kind of where we've been. Right? That's a prequel. That's famous right nowadays in movies where you get all the prequel stories, the background kind of thing. So fast forward to now and what we're trying to do and branching out. Palm Beach Lakes Church of Christ. The elders there, they said, hey, we want to do more mission work. As we were kind of phasing out, have been working with them, with the youth and family for many, many years, and our children are now in college, and we were saying, hey, we want to go back into the mission field. And they said, well, we don't want you to go, they knew that we don't want you to go back to Paraguay just yet. We would like to keep you around, but we'd also like to do more domestic work. That was their focus. We want to do more domestic work. What would that look like, Josh? And so they asked us, hey, put something together. What is it going to look like if we were going to be a resource to congregations? And that was their thing. Palm Beach Lakes had got to a point where they paid off their debts, and they want to be a resource to congregations as much as possible. And so they asked us to put something together. So this is what we came up with. We sold our home, and we used the proceeds to purchase our new home. As of May, we live in this rig full time, or with our friends here. But we live in this rig full time. And the idea is to be a resource and being as available as possible to congregations. And we go around to these congregations and work with them. I pushed the wrong button. Evangelizing, encouraging, edifying, equipping, and we can do this in an extended way. So what that looks like is we will talk with the congregation and start a communication and see about what's needed, what do they need, what are they wanting to do, what are some areas that they can grow in, and we begin talking about what can happen in that area, and then we will set a date where we can come and work with them to 2 to 3 months as a congregation and encourage them to do the work. So we'll come in, we will start visiting the wayward, those that have fallen away. We'll start making new contacts in the community. We'll be doing things like gospel meetings and seminars and things there in that congregation. And because we're there extended stay, we can do the follow-up studies and work with the contacts that we've made in our efforts there. But all the while doing that with them. So this is not a work where we come in, we do the work, and then leave, and you still have this void. Right? That's not going to work. So we come in, do the work with them, and show them, yes, you can do this, or you're already doing the right things, and encourage them to, oh yeah, we're doing this right. Have you ever been there, been in a situation where you just need somebody to come in and validate you're doing the right things? When we were getting ready to move to Asuncion, and had my young family, and we're packing up that night and getting ready to go, and I was so focused on all the things that had to happen that I couldn't focus on just packing in that moment. And my friend came in and was like, hey, you all right? I said, yeah, I just can't, and he's like, well, let's just do this. And we started packing, and he's like, you got this. And, him coming in, and it seems like a simple thing, but sometimes when your life is just so crazy and you don't know what's going on, somebody coming alongside of you to tell you, you've got this, you're doing all the right things, you got this. And so in some cases, that's what we're going in to do. There are some areas where congregation is never going to be huge. Right? You have small communities, and just a numbers game, guys, right? It's not going to be a huge congregation, and that's fine. That is okay. There are congregations that need to know it's okay to be a small congregation in an area where it's a small community, but they need to keep being what God needs them to be. Keep being the light. Keep plugging along. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep teaching other people. Keep reaching out. But it's okay if you don't have to be a mega church to be a church of the Lord's body. So we go in and work with them and doing those things and working alongside them. This is incidentally something that my grandfather did back in the 80s and 90s in the Northwest. And he said, you need to go in. And when he was talking about the work, he said, you need to go in, work with them, make it like they've been doing it the whole time, right? Work with them and teach them, and they've been doing it the whole time. Then right away, and they say, who was that masked man, right? So, it harkens back to some older movies, but that's the idea of getting them to do the work. And so answering Macedonian calls is the idea of just going where we're needed. We don't have a region. There's not a certain place. My grandfather did focus in the Northwest. We're just, again, praying God send us where we're needed. We're working specifically with congregations that are isolated, that aren't around other congregations. There are sections of our country where there are several congregations in one area. You throw a rock and hit two, right? So there are areas where there are several congregations close by, and those aren't the areas we're necessarily going to be working in. They should be, working together in that area, in those communities, if they're so close together. Similarly, Palm Beach Lakes, we've worked with congregations in our county to help them as well. And so that needs to be happening. But we're going with congregations that are out away from other congregations that don't have those kind of resources for somebody to come alongside them and work with them. They don't necessarily, they can have a preacher. I don't know if you've ever seen a one-man band. Sometimes a preacher in an area, especially a small community, smaller congregations, become that one-man band. They do everything. They mow the lawn, they put the bulletin together, they do all these different things. And sometimes they need somebody coming in to say, hey, you got this, let's work together for a little bit. He can take a breath and come up for air, and then give them that time to kind of recharge him and his family. So it also is something we can do in an area. So that's kind of what we're looking at doing. And obviously, it's not a foreign concept. Maybe the mode is foreign, But Paul's work was similar. Right? When we look in the New Testament, when we look at what Paul was doing, it was very, very similar. Look in Acts chapter 13. Acts chapter 13, beginning in verse 1, and we look here in about Paul. When you hear about what Paul is going to be doing in his call, Christ told Ananias, like, hey, go talk to him. He needs to know about the work that I'm calling him to do. And he is the apostle unto the Gentiles. So in Acts chapter 13, beginning in verse 1, he says, now there were at Antioch in the church that was there prophets, teachers, Barnabas and Simeon, who was called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with the Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. So it's naming these guys that apparently are equipped individuals in the congregation in Antioch. And so these are, some heavy hitters there in that area. And while they were ministering to the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them. And so this congregation, Antioch, becomes, throughout the rest of the what we see in Acts, Antioch becomes this sending congregation. That they send out Paul and Barnabas, they send out others to go out into the known world at the time, as well as others. There were other congregations doing this, but Antioch is the one that we read most about. And so they go out from here, and they go on their way in the Spirit and do this work. Very cool. He straight up just pulled that up there. That was not in my slide. Excellent. Was it Steve back there? Steve's on point. Okay. So they do this work in what they're doing. And it's a similar thing. So we are going out. Palm Beach Lakes is our Antioch, sending us out into the field, so to speak. And we are going. And so Paul goes on his journey. I have clicked the button. Let's do that. That makes it easy. Look over in Acts chapter 16. Acts chapter 16. Anybody know what happens in Acts chapter 16? I mean, a lot happens in Acts chapter 16, but we have Timothy joining the band, the merry band that travels with Paul, and he was spoken well of by the brethren, and his sacrifice in order to go into the work with Paul. In verse 9, a vision appeared to Paul, and a man of Macedonia who was standing and appealing to him, saying, come over to Macedonia and help us. And that's kind of the idea that we're looking at, is we're trying to answer that kind of call. There are congregations all over that have a need, that want somebody to come work with them. And so that's what we're doing, answering that Macedonian call and trying to go work with congregations. And we see that they go over the next day to Philippi. It was a leading city in that area of Macedonia. And we see the beginning of the church in Philippi, which incidentally, whenever I'm doing a report on Easter Island initially, so Piki, one of the first converts that we had, she was a seller of things to the community. Which the first convert in Philippi was a seller of purple, right, Lydia. Because Paul went down to the place, because he goes into this area, and his practice was to go into an area and go to the synagogues. Anybody remember why do you think Paul would go to the synagogues in a city first? Why do you think you go to the synagogues? What's that? That's where the Jews were congregated, and that, to the Jew first and also the Gentile was his kind of mantra, but also that's the people that should know, right? Those are the ones that should have known the prophecies, they should know, so we would start there and then kind of work out into the community. And here he goes and they ask, where, it was on the Sabbath day, verse 13, and they went outside the gate at Riverside where we were worshiped. We're supposing there would be a place of prayer. So we're going to where the religious people are, is what he would do. And so he found Lydia, and she responded to the message. And then you had the Philippian jailer who responded to the message after after the earthquake. Our second convert, Uri, who was a son of Piki, is a jailer. That is his job. He works in the prison. And so these things started coming together. I was like, oh man, it's still happening. So these kind of things play out all over the globe, all over the place. When you preach the gospel and teach just the gospel to honest hearts, that's what happens. And it's still happening. These kind of things are still happening, minus the stripes. We're not getting, at least we haven't yet. So we're trying to stay away from that. But we go into these areas, and Paul goes to all these cities. Thank you, Oz, and puts all these cities and these regions and areas and travels, and you some of those cities you recognize. We have books named after some of them, and you see the work that he's doing. On their second journey, before they started off, he said, we need to go out and see how the brethren are doing. And so that becomes a work not only of just visiting with them, but encouraging them. So here's what he does in those places. These are once you go through Acts and you kind of put together what is it that Paul is doing in these places. And in a similar fashion, we'll be doing similar things, save the miraculous, but we'll be doing similar things. You will have a situation where you're confronting heresy, where people are teaching false doctrine in an area. That happens. That continues to happen, unfortunately. And you go in and say, hey, here's a different way of looking at it. Here's what the Bible says about a thing. And you work with people. One eldership we've been talking with asked, well, what if you go into an area and they're not teaching the truth? And I said, well, it depends. He's like, what do you mean? I said, it depends on if they're just ignorant on what's going on or if they're purposely teaching false doctrine. You kind of see the difference? Yes, we would correct both situations, but you handle it differently. There are congregations that are isolated, that they take the Bible and they do the best they can, and they have men that are preaching, and men get on the internet and start Googling sermons and things like that, and they became Google theologians, which can be fun. But what happens is they might teach things inadvertently that are error. And so you go into a place that is spiritually immature, and they're teaching something, and you work with them and say, hey, that's not right. And say, oh, I didn't know that. And, you help correct them, and they move away from it. But it's very, very different when they're purposely teaching error, and they're not going to move on it. And that is also happening in places where it's becoming popular, even amongst the Lord's church, to move the ancient landmarks, to move the boundaries that God has set up for the sake of culture, for the sake of numbers, for the sake of popularity, moving things that God never intended for us to move. And so when we go into places, we might be dealing with it, but mostly we'll be going to encourage. Mostly we'll be going there to educate, lift them up, and help them to do the work on their own. And that's the idea of this type of ministry. Now, the reaction to Paul's work was varied. Some of these, I didn't put up all the things. Some of them, he was stoned, he was beaten, he was shipwrecked, there's all these other things that happened to him. But the response to the Lord's message is still very varied as well. That has not changed. The human element in ministry hasn't changed. When you read through Acts and you read through the New Testament, the human element hasn't changed. How we respond to message, how we respond to truth, how we change our lives or don't change our lives doesn't change. And so that is the idea of what we will be doing with answering Macedonian calls. I'd like to open it up for questions, comments, shout-outs, concerns. Yes, sir?
Find them, get in contact with congregations that need help.
That's very good. So the question is asking, how do you find contacts, congregations that might need the help? And we are not publicizing huge kind of haste, because I believe we'd be overwhelmed. Right now, it's been word of mouth. The Dulls that I mentioned, Gary and Deborah Dull, who are in Carolinas, they kind of do what we're doing, but just in a certain region. But they have congregations they can't get to in the Carolinas, and they're in Kentucky, so they're talking to us about going to some of those places. I have some contacts out west that I know of places out there. We're still raising our funding right now, so we haven't built out 2024 yet, but we're in the process of doing that. And as far as a year is concerned, I neglected to mention this, and mentioning the places we've been. As we were going out and traveling, there are certain times of the year where Florida gets flooded with other people that are traveling in RVs as well, because it's inclement to travel in those other states during that season. So January, February, March, we will kind of come back down into Florida as we're frozen out of those other states, and travel to Paraguay, Easter Island, and Cuba and continue those works. The funds that we're using for those travels, Palm Beach Lakes, is supplying those funds. And we are raising currently just our working fund, just the funds needed for the travel and fuel and those kind of things, getting to these congregations. Other question? Oh, yes, sir.
I traveled to many of those countries during the early 1990s. And one of the most difficult problems that I had was I had somebody with me who spoke Spanish. What they call it dialect the other day. What I call high Spanish, not low Spanish.
Yeah.
But I found that in Paraguay and Chile and Easter Island, the Spanish is all different. So how did you find somebody to communicate with?
So Spanish can be different in different countries, and you got to be careful. The Spanish we learned in Paraguay was mixed with Guarani, so it wasn't pure Spanish what we were learning. But our teacher that was teaching us would tell us, all right, here are some things that are different with the Spanish. So as we were learning it, she was building in those kind of things, and also telling us about different countries and communities and cultures. So it was interesting the way she taught us. We didn't learn just Spanish. She taught us kind of how it was used in different countries, and that was helpful. Paraguay uses the vos form that would be kind of not appropriate to use in other places. Easter Island, incidentally, they mix their Spanish with Rapa Nui language, and so you would not say, hola, buenos dias, those kind of things. You would say, iorana, behekoi, right, when you're talking with them. And so you just kind of pick it up. And you have to be willing to be embarrassed and make mistakes and learn. You learn very well that way. But yes, that's a very good point. Cuba, incidentally, was different. I had to learn some new words there. But they look at you like, you should know this. Like, you're speaking Spanish, you should know this. I'm like, but you're on an island. I don't know your Spanish. Anyway, so very good question. Any other? Yes, sir.
Seeing that Cuba is like a government, where if you have to carry funds to help the congregation, is there a restriction on how much you can bring or you donate it to them?
Yes, yeah. So I think you can only, as far as how much funds you can bring in to donate, I believe on you is 5,000 you can bring in at a time. I will not say publicly that maybe that doesn't always the limit. Like, sometimes people bring in more. But there are ways of getting funds to them through kind of banks in other countries kind of scenario. But those typically is what we do. We bring in funds as we go. But 5,000 is the limit. So, yeah. Very good question. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much for your time this morning, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you.